Wes? Wes?
Yeah.
Walk her all the way up, make sure she's
Okay.
Oh.
All right, so before we get started on our Torah portion, we need to recall what the scripture says in Devarim 8, verse 10. It says, you'll eat and be satisfied, and you'll bless Adonai your God for good land he has given you. So let's do that. Abba, we have eaten and we're satisfied. We thank you for the land. It's in Yeshua's name. Amen. We'd be able to make an appointment to see the dentist?
I don't know if their office will be open Monday or not. But even if it were, they're so busy that they would schedule it for weeks out.
Oh. Even if you're in pain.
Not in pain. That was a root canal.
I'm saying even if you were.
They would go ahead and schedule you weeks out, the next opening, but put you on the list of if somebody cancels. They call.
So if you went home and it was nighttime and the dark was out, you could get some chipper glue or got something at home you can just get back on.
I wouldn't be against doing that, but no.
This was our first verse with the Torah portion entitled. Title comes from Re'eh. Here was our readings. So I didn't do a choose the number of mitzvot. There are 52 mitzvot from the traditional sources.
I think there's probably 52.
Yeah, that would be answer C if we're doing the listing. So I do have some printouts.
You know, I've got one question about that.
Mitzvah list. Here's a printout of the mitzvah list portion.
Isn't that, aren't some of those reset?
Yeah.
Well, see, that's the thing is with the number of mitzvot are more than it appears in more than one place. For example, Devarim 14 has clean versus unclean.
Right.
We read that. But there's also, of course, in Vayikra 11.
Yeah.
And so most of those are taken from a different portion. In other words, of the total number of the 613, so that some of them appear in more than one location. So
But usually in the first part of like in Leviticus.
it's not always the first time you see something where the mitzvah is drawn from according to the traditional counting of the mitzvah.
So whose account is this according to?
Rambam. Excuse me.
I'm sure Rabbi is being what
What's the other
rabbis,
one?
Chazal is the other one.
Is there not?
as you'll say, probably more than one that you could draw from.
This is the list you have in front of you is the one that FFOC has adopted as this is where this comes
Bam
from.
Bam.
You know, I used to.
The ones in blue are the ones that say applies in every place and time. Because when you look at the mitzvot list, there are a number of them that could only be applied in a certain time period. So the first one on there, though, where it says P185,
Yeah.
it's too small on the screen to be able to read it that well. But P185, positive number 185, to destroy all idols and places of worship idolatry. So in other words, the traditional high places would be a way to look at that, right? That's where there was a, what's the right term? it was when Israel set up high place, particularly if you look back historically, the Northern Kingdom was the ones who began to do a lot of that, right? They would set up high places for worship and even change the dates for doing the biblical holidays in the Northern Kingdom of Israel that was ran by Ephraim. The negative number 65, we actually have looked at that a couple of years ago with the dilemma among it's really a dilemma that's talked about by the rabbis, but it would be talking about in the first century, a dilemma that kind of goes back to the Gospel of Matthew, probably, in that in order to, the authorities, the Jewish authorities, wanted to eliminate the gospel texts and burn the texts, right? But they ran into a problem because, well, it's in those texts contain the divine name, but there are Nazarene writings that contain the divine name, which we don't really find anymore. Even, of course, in the current editions of the Gospel of Matthew, from even the Hebrew text, I mean, they don't contain the divine name. They have, like a hey with an apostrophe kind of next to it. Some of them have like a circle, but they don't have
Shem Tov, or
I'm talking about Shem Tov here. Neither Dutele nor Shem Tov.
Okay, so did the original?
That's what I'm saying. Because of the discussion about from the rabbis talking about should we destroy these texts even if they contain the divine name? But so they could only really be talking. I mean, I would guess they'd be talking about possibly the Book of Hebrews and the Gospel of Matthew, and some editions of those probably did contain the divine name, or there wouldn't have been that discussion about whether these heretical writings should be destroyed or not.
What about Mark, Luke?
Well, it's possible, but there's not really good evidence that either of those were written in Hebrew. There's Aramaic editions of those editions, and so the Aramaic look in the Peshitta, but I'm really thinking of the Targumim. They had euphemisms as well in the Targumim in Aramaic. So it seems as likely that they would have euphemisms as well in Aramaic editions of the New Testament, the Ketuvim Mitzrayim. You have a copy of the mitzvot list in front of you, I think, is on there, Wes.
Oh, yes.
So we're kind of just looking through them. The ones in blue on your handout are ones that FFOZ, at least, this is where this list comes from, derived from Maimonides' list, where they have said applies in every time and place. There's only one on the second slide that's in that category. That's to offer all sacrifices only within the temple. Of course, that applies in every time and place, but that indicates that there's currently no temple standing, so that one can't be accomplished.
What about Shiloh? When the tabernacle was there?
Right. So this is
There's no set apart God stands place this way. This is here.
right. So it is sort of a modernism, or at least since the second temple period, at least, to interpret. What you could. I mean, there's not going to probably be, in their view, there's not going to be another Shiloh temple or a tabernacle. There's going to be another temple.
I agree.
And so
where I was going prior to the temple.
Right, but we're not living prior to the temple, so the command to have a tabernacle wouldn't apply, if that makes sense.
In every time and place, so that would be before and after.
He's misunderstanding.
That's not what they mean by that. It means every time and place. In other words, just like you're supposed to do Passover in every time and place, you can only do the Passover offering in every time and place in the place where he chooses.
Correct. Okay, I see you mean. Yeah, so we have to wait for another temple before they can
Or another altar.
Another altar. I mean, look, if you look back, historically speaking, of course, is where with
Yes.
with the altar that the second temple was built with, so to speak, was it became operational before the temple itself surrounded it. It was an altar where Ezra did the
I didn't necessarily mean the temple had to be built.
an
From
altar.
my understanding, as long as the cornerstone's laid, you can build the altar and go.
So the temple is dependent on the altar not on the temple. There can be an altar without a temple, but there can't be a temple without an altar.
Right.
So it's a
Okay,
dependent
if-
relationship.
If you're talking about sacrifices, there has to be two things. There has to be an altar and a functioning priesthood.
Right. That's true.
I forgot
Yeah.
about that.
And you see that
Symbiotic relationship.
there's several of the mitzvot. For example, if you look on P86 and in 41, they say with the temple and the Levitical system in place on the listing here. It seems though that P84 should also be the same way, except the reason they have it there is so that you don't get the idea that, well, there's not a temple standing, so we can do it anywhere we want to.
Given that there are people trying to build altars all over the place, I'm sure this is why it was put in.
I just can't understand it, how they can even get that.
Well, they got that because some Messianics became zealous nuts.
Backyard
Yeah, well,
sacrifices.
Yeah.
And instead they were like, we're not Christians, we hate Christians, begin slaughtering the animals.
if you only go with Exodus chapter 12, you might think, in fact, that, well, they did the first Passover outside the land of Egypt. And so Passover isn't necessarily requiring us to have a specific place because there's not an altar in Egypt for the Passover that every household did.
It was prior.
If they stop reading before they get to this Torah portion, they might think that's good. But this Torah portion says specifically, only don't do it anymore like he did in the old days, right?
Yeah.
Do it only with the place he sets his name.
Yeah.
He's to establish his name.
Well, and even then there was Shiloh. He placed his name there.
Right.
His name was movable at his whim until he dedicated the one
In Jerusalem.
So
Right.
this is for all time.
And the one in Egypt was done before the Torah was given.
Right. But I'm just saying that the reason why I know of two different Messianic groups that have done sacrifices for Passover, one in Texas and one in California.
That's just scary.
It is. I don't disagree with that. I mean, if you look at it in a sad way, the one in Texas, the person who was leading that congregation died, and the whole ministry basically is gone, doesn't exist anymore.
It says what he means. It means what he says. I agree with that.
Well,
I'm not saying that he died because of this, but I know that his ministry has been destroyed.
It was all
Essentially,
hinged on him.
Yes, it was his ministry. Yeah, he actually he was at one of the Sukkots we did. Can't remember where it was now. It was one where Carrie was. Was it at Lake Murray? Can't remember now.
Where is
It may have been-
Lake Murray?
Well,
east
it's
of here.
Ardmore.
Is that Ardmore?
I think it was one at Ardmore years ago, of course.
Okay.
Well, so there's even, if you talk about backyard sacrifice. What we read today says, if you sacrifice an animal, kill an animal and shed its blood, anywhere but where God's saying, you have a blood guilt on you. You are guilty of spilling blood.
If you sacrifice, in other words,
Sacrifice,
yes,
yeah. Like the backyard sacrifice.
right.
Oh,
But you
so-
can kill from your flock or herd
To eat.
Yeah,
Yes.
kill it as if like a gazelle or a deer. Which, of course, why is gazelle and deer mentioned? Because A, they're clean, and B, they're not they're not part of,
Sacrificial system.
right, it's not, you never sacrifice a gazelle
Yeah.
as an
Bring it
offering.
here and then keep the rack there anymore.
We had lamb one year, but we didn't sacrifice it. We killed it long beforehand and packaged it up like regular meat. We had some of that for the Passover. That's only because it's what we had.
Yeah.
But it was not sacrificed. It was
Right.
not meant for that.
Well, and what we do today really isn't.
It's in a remembrance.
It's a remembrance.
Yeah.
We can't keep every detail,
Exactly.
every law.
Well, because we're not doing it
In the
at the
land.
place where he chooses, right?
Right.
So it would never
It's just
be
kind of a remembrance.
never be tov in that sense, yeah. But again, based on an example from Leviticus or from Vayikra, well, Vayikra 17 actually says backyard sacrifices are the same as sacrificing to goat demons, right?
Yeah.
So this is not the first time that's been mentioned in the sense of
Yeah.
don't do it as a sacrifice.
Yeah. 'Cause we didn't build it. We didn't do anything like that.
Right.
At all.
So
But in those remote places, you're still to abide by what you do with the blood from that animal.
yes, always it says
Always
pour it out like
on the
water.
ground,
Yeah.
No matter where you're at.
That's what we did.
Pour it on the ground like water.
Yep.
And so even those that say every time and place, they're ones that are there because if it didn't say it, you might think, well, we can do the sin and guilt offerings outside the temple. Outside the temple, you can eat the meat of a burnt offering. In other words, the ideas, from this in terms of if they're an offering, like a sacrifice, savach, you can't do it without a functioning priesthood and a functioning altar. But you can continue to eat meat within any of your cities, as long as it's when it's killed, the blood is poured out on the ground like water. We also see, and this one is it's on, I'm not sure which on your handout. It's slide 9, I think is what it is. Am I reading it right? No, it's slide 9 on this one, but it's not slide 9 there. It's in 3:13. Let's see.
Slide 8.
Okay, where it says
Not
not to add to the precepts of Torah.
Yeah.
And that applies to everyone, every time and place. So you're not allowed to add to nor take away from the Torah in any time and place, which makes sense. It's not, you can do things that are not in the Torah. You can do traditions. Paul described traditions and call it Torah. It could be, it's not Torah. And the next page, negative number 314 is also not to detract. So we had the don't add to and don't subtract from or detract from. Every time and place, in 28, not to pay attention to anyone who prophesies in the name of idols. The next ones are similar. These all come from Devarim 13, and the next several come from Devarim 13:9. Not to love an enticer, to relax one's hatred toward an enticer, not to rescue an enticer from death, not to defend an enticer. So what is an enticer in this context? What's an enticer?
Can I say something before the enticer?
Is it enticing?
You calling one?
It could be. No,
Stones up?
no, I wouldn't do what you do. So, I think so. So, what I wanted to say was, I find it ironic. It's Deuteronomy 13, talking about the prophet, the bad prophet. Don't listen to him.
Right.
You go to 1 Kings chapter 13, and that prophet listened to another prophet because God told him. And I'm like, can that somehow fit into this?
I don't know. I know that verse numbers and chapters aren't.
Oh, is it? Look, so much thinking about the verse numbers. I was thinking more about the fact that the man of God, that God told him, go in there and go this way, not come back the same way, don't eat or drink, go do what you got to do and get back, and don't listen to anybody else. So he goes, and this evil prophet tells him.
Hold on, it didn't say evil. I'm saying he was bad, but it's saying he's not described as that. Former prophet he described it.
No, either way, it doesn't matter. He told him, God told me to tell you. And my point being is that you're already a man of God or a prophet. If God's already speaking to you and he didn't tell you, this guy obviously, no, God will tell me or nothing. I'm going to do what God said because I'm just applying. I'm looking at, hey, this is played out over here. What this is trying to tell you, you know. So that's my own opinion. Anyway, I'm sorry. So an enticer.
So I think that when it says on N16, not to be an enticer, this applies to Jewish people and God-fearing Gentile believers in every place and time.
Is it 17? That's 11 enticer.
N16 from 13 verse 12.
I don't see an N16.
It's after N21.
Oh, okay.
It seems to me that it is selling that a bit short in the sense that it applies to everybody at all times.
Yeah.
It's not to try to be a false teacher. And I mean, because really, it's not, it seems to be, I mean, less likely that the individual who's being an enticer is trying to entice the children of Israel away from the God of Israel. Would be more likely to be not from the children of Israel. I don't know that for sure. It could be anyone. So I think that it would be anyone that would be potentially an enticer in that sense. Okay, not to cut oneself, to gash. And I think the context is the same as for N45, the next slide, not to cut oneself. I think it applies to the same thing as the reason for it is for.
Why did they do that?
For the dead.
For the dead, yeah.
I don't know. How did they do it? Well, I mean, I don't understand anything about it, is what I'm saying. They just didn't cut themselves and that was it? Or was it a certain way? Or
It was to appease the ghost of the spirit of the dead person to not come on vengeance, like, oh,
yeah, I
I
got
think
that.
it would also apply, like a couple guys I knew, when a real close relative of theirs died, they carved their name in their arm.
Yeah, I think
They did that cutting because
in other words, it was an act of mourning. Yeah, right.
But still, God said, don't do that.
Yes, that's right.
Right, okay.
See? Not to eat the biggest question that often comes up in discussion of these mitzvot is where it says in 181 from Devarim 14:21, not to eat the meat of a torn animal.
I think in some versions it says a brutalized animal or ravaged animal.
It's the kind of animal. Well, when an animal is not killed by having its blood be drained on the ground. In other words, it could be killed by wild animals, or roadkill. Yeah.
Gee, I'm sorry.
Anything that died savagely.
Yeah, we were trained that you could eat roadkill depending, and you had to look for certain signs of how far you could go. I hope I never have to do this.
That was man's science. This is God's science.
I know. God says don't do it at all, so I guess that one's out. It's weird.
Not to deny charity to the poor in 232. And it's opposite, or it's not opposite, but it's, on the other hand, is to give charity. That's what it's talking about with the, when Wes read that section, it's basically with a wide open hand. In other words, you put your funds in the hand and don't grasp onto it or hold it. You keep the hand open until the need is
As
met.
much as they need.
And of course, in 231 kind of presupposes the Shemitah year being in effect, not to refuse a loan to the poor because of the year of release. The Shemitah year is near. In other words, you know that the debt is going to be released soon, so you don't give a loan because you're not going to get your
Just give a little bit.
right. So that's it's not. It's basically don't play gamesmanship. In other words, be as open as you would if it was still years away for the Shemitah year. Of course, the next page here in 113 and 114, these are about consecrated animals that have been declared you're going to be sacrificed. You can't do work with them. You can't gain profit from them by shearing, for example, if they're a sheep, I guess.
That would be kind of, well, I guess you would be taking them within, what, a year, two? At the
Yes,
most, to be sacrificed.
right.
Okay.
But I think, again, those are on here because they don't want you to think that you could do that if there's not a standing temple or a functioning altar in the tabernacle. But it seems like those would be, would say it should say, only when a functioning temple or tabernacle is working, because you couldn't actually have a consecrated animal without that, I think. The next one is more of a added to, I think, in the sense of in 199, not to eat any chametz afternoon on Nisan 14. That's more of a tradition versus a mitzvah, I think. If you check, do you have Devarim Deuteronomy 16:13 handy? You could read the text.
16 what?
13. I'm 16:3. Sorry, I misread that.
3.
16:3.
Okay. Thou shalt eat no leavened bread with it. 7 days shalt thou eat unleavened bread therewith, even the bread of affliction. For thou camest forth out of the land of Mitzrayim in haste, and thou mayst remember the day when thou camest forth out of the land of Egypt, all the days of thy life.
So why does it say afternoon? Well, because on the 14th is the day of Passover, right? It's not a no work day. It's a work day, but the idea of Bein ha'erevin, or between the evenings,
That's what I was going to say.
because the sun begins to set at noon, and is between the noon and the setting of the sun that the children of Israel would do the sacrifice for Israel as well as their own animals for Passover. And that's why it says don't eat any chametz afternoon. And they're starting on with Bein ha'erevin, or the setting of the sun. I think that it's not specific in Torah that says don't eat any leaven afternoon at that time, as you get prepared for the Passover that evening, when you would not, obviously there's no leaven being eaten at the Passover.
I don't think we ever have eaten any leaven on that day, afternoon, because we were so busy getting everything ready. Lunch was already over.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. But, yeah.
But this is a mitzvah, a positive mitzvah. Positive number 54, to be joyful during festivals, and that comes directly from the text. I think it's specifically talking about Sukkot. That's why Sukkot is known as the season of our joy. So it's a mitzvah to be joyful. So get that scowl off your face there, Wes.
What if you stub your toe?
Smile.
Joyfully didn't get the toenail ripped.
Dance.
What if a wild bear's chasing you?
Be joyful you're ahead of me.
Be joyful you have a buffalo gun with you.
Yeah.
So the first verses of our portion, here's from 11:26 to 28, says, "See," or re'eh, see, "I'm setting before you today a blessing and a curse. A blessing if you listen to the mitzvot of Adonai your God that I'm giving you today, and a curse if you don't listen to mitzvot of Adonai your God, but turn aside from the way I'm ordering you today and follow other gods you have not known." So that's where the blessing and the curse comes from. Blessing is for obedience. The curse is for disobedience. That's right.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
No.
So Mount Gerizim and
Mhm.
Mount Ebal,
Yes.
one was north, one was south? Is that how that was?
Well, I guess it depends on your viewpoint, but it could be.
Well,
This
according
is
to the text, when I was looking at it, my understanding was it was basically saying, as the sun goes basically east to west, one is on one side, one is on the other. So north and south.
No, that'd be east and west.
No, the sun goes east and west.
I thought you said this. The verse was saying that it was like from hilltop. The sun was setting on one hilltop and rising from another.
I think it's north and south
Okay.
because you can see
I'll see how
this
it's
is
different.
a picture from Google Earth.
So where are these actually located in Israel?
It's kind of on the entrance, so to speak, by Itamar and
So they're like right there on the Jordan River, and then a couple miles inland.
it's inland from the crossing, but yeah.
So
At
it's
the crossing.
in Israel itself.
hmm The entrance to the land of Israel.
Okay,
So this is Gerizim is on the left in this case. Ebal is on the right.
which is the north.
Uh-huh. And this is the view of Gerizim from Mount. Go back. This is the view of Gerizim. I'm sorry. This is Gerizim from Mount Ebal.
Okay.
Oh, cool. I've never seen a picture of it. So yeah, you could. I see now. I see.
So-
I'll tell you what, you could hear either side. Was there another location where God did this? Or is this the only location?
As far as I know, it's the only one where the blessing and the curses are talked about in this kind of context.
Okay. I want to say it was either in Exodus or Numbers. I thought that they had done something like this.
Well, there is some history between if you go back to the most famous example or the discussion is the woman at the well. I think that's where some of this may be derived from, but in terms of the discussion about the temple. So here's what it says. Jews, this is talking about upon the return of Israel from Babylon, they would not accept the Samaritans, those who stayed behind and mixed with the conquerors, as brothers. The Samaritans established their center of worship in Samaria, or Shomron, but also continued they were part of those who were harassing the returning Jews and building the first temple, or the second temple, excuse me. When Alexander the Great captured the city of Shomron in 332 BCE, he turned it into a Greek place of worship and a Greek settlement and basically a retirement area for his army veterans. Lower cost of living, that sort of thing. Sort of like Belize.
Reward.
It's like Belize,
Oh, Belize? You can handle the earthquakes.
Well, that was probably the pay for all the soldiers was you get your own land.
Your own
you get
land,
city,
yeah.
You get to boss it.
It's
all
fertile.
over.
It's fertile land,
Yeah.
and the price is cheap.
Free.
Yeah, it's all yours. The price of
So your comment on the bottom, at that time the Samaritans moved their center of worship to Shechem.
yes. Well, Shechem Shechem and Itamar are the two cities that are kind of right there. There's another name for Shechem that's used by the Palestinians today because it's basically
Isn't that the current Shechem today?
no. Well, I don't think. It's called something else.
Isn't it where the Cave of Machpelah is?
Uh,
I hate when people shift the names around, it drives me crazy.
I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, isn't it called,
But
Oh.
Ithamar is a Jewish city, and the other one, is it Nablus?
Nablus?
That is
Yeah, it's Nablus. The old Shechem is Nablus.
Right.
Yeah. I knew it was an N. I wanted to say Necropolis. I knew that.
Isn't that south of Jerusalem?
well, I would say predominantly it would be east, but maybe further south as well.
Where's Nebo?
I don't know. I'm not worried about Nebo.
Wait a minute, I thought- wait, hold on.
Nebo is
Hold
in
on.
Jordan.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought Shechem was north of Jerusalem.
Well, certainly Samaria is.
Okay. So, but if the Samaritans worship the Shechem, doesn't it mean that Shechem is north of Jerusalem?
Well, they changed their place of worship from Shomron to Shechem,
Which is not.
and they built a temple on Mount Gerizim. That temple is referred to in the woman at the
That's
well
north of Jerusalem,
vignette.
isn't it?
Say again?
It's north of Jerusalem, right?
Look on
I need to look at my map. I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm all confused here. Yeah, wait a minute, hold on. Isn't Nablus, isn't that the new name for Bethlehem?
No.
All right, hold on. Oh, I was thinking Samaria. Okay.
Well, Shomron and Samaria is the same.
Okay, yeah, Mount Gerizim is way north of Jerusalem. You got a map in there? Because mine's.
No, mine is not.
Okay. Yeah, Samaria and Gerizim are way north of Jerusalem.
I see.
I don't see any Shechem.
I see.
It's
So,
not very important. I just.
In the time of the Maccabees, the Jews drove the Syro-Greeks out of the area, established the Hasmonean kingdom. The John Hyrcanus captured Shomron and Shechem and also Mount Gerizim and destroyed the Samaritan temple there in 129 CE. So
Ouch.
about 100 years or so prior to Yeshua's time on the earth, they destroyed their temple. But when you look at, was that justified? It was certainly a brutal thing that he did. A lot of people were killed in that conquest.
Especially since John Hyrcanus, at least in the book of Maccabees, was not really a great guy anyway.
Right.
Seems like-
So the question is, was he justified in doing that? Were they worshiping? Were they committing idolatry at that temple?
I don't know.
I don't know enough about their worship to say one way or the other. Certainly, those who were working for him at the time thought that was probably the case. They were committing at least blasphemy by the way they did things. Because you look at, their scriptures have been altered somewhat. They have different. The Samaritan Pentateuch is different than the
I would bet
Hebrew.
a dollar to a donut that it wasn't through John Hyrcanus. I can't pronounce his name.
yeah.
I bet it was more for political, like centralizing power, than it was about actually doing anything for any sort of zeal.
Jeroboam started it off on the wrong foot anyway.
Well, no, okay, that's not the. Okay, I don't think so. I don't think the Samaritans are the
So-
inheritors of.
The destruction of that temple occurred, before, 100 and something years before this conversation. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it since you are a Judean, yet you ask to drink of me? I'm a Samaritan woman, for the Judeans do not deal with the Samaritans. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, Gerizim. You say that Jerusalem is the place that's proper to worship." So she was kind of trying to change the subject or something to say, to not deal with a personal thing, but saying, it's why do you say this is where we worship? How can you say Jerusalem's the right place?
Yeah.
The reason they could say that is that, again, don't alter the Torah, right? Well, guess what they did? In the Samaritan Pentateuch, it says, after the 10th mitzvot of the 10 words, Yah tells Israel that Mount Gerizim is the place that he has chosen to place his name, and that mount is where he is to be worshipped, according to the Samaritan Pentateuch. So the text has been altered essentially to justify setting their temple up on Mount Gerizim.
Okay, so if they did that, why would we want to read anything from the Peshitta if that's where that comes from?
Well, just like in the.
Wait. Samaritan Pentateuch is different than Peshitta.
Okay, that's good. It cleared it up.
Samaritan Pentateuch is in Hebrew.
Mhm.
It's written in Paleo Hebrew. The language, the text that was before Israel came back from Babylon, and it really is only, it's limited in terms of the text. It's
Wait a minute.
they don't.
So, I never realized that there was a difference between the Samaritan Pentateuch and what's the other one?
Well, the
The Peshitta.
Tanakh.
Okay, I never caught that. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So the Samaritan Pentateuch is just the 5 books of Moshe.
Okay, yeah.
And there are
That was written in Paleo Hebrew.
yes
Okay,
yes.
I'm
Okay.
straight now. Sorry. We were just watching yesterday the.
You're thinking the Masoretic text, I think, is what you're thinking of, Wes.
Nope.
The opposite.
Oh no.
No,
I was thinking about. See, yesterday we were watching that Exodus on the controversy of Moses.
no, the Timothy Ron.
Yeah, controversy of Moses. The Moses controversy. Okay, I
Mhm.
got it right. So, and he was talking about how, as it went through there, the Paleo Hebrew is where, in my understanding, is where, from following the film, that's where they call it the Philistine language. What do they call it?
Phoenician?
Phoenician.
Right. The letters are the same. If you look into a Phoenician or Canaanite alphabet, is the same as the Paleo Hebrew. I think
Right.
with some minor, very minor variants, and certainly it changed a little bit over time. Because you look at Paleo Hebrew for different time periods, it's written a little bit differently.
Right, but what I was wondering was, in my understanding, that is not Phoenician. That should be the original Hebrew, or right before Hebrew 1.0. Because I agree with Mahoney, because everything that he brought up about it, where the Hebrews never changed it, the Phoenicians changed it, the Canaanites changed it a little bit here or there, but the Hebrews never did change it. If you're the ones that created it, you wouldn't change it for a while. And someone else may change it to make so yours wouldn't look the same. So if it's Paleo Hebrew that they did this in, then it's kind of ironic, because that goes all the way back to where they just entered the land around that time frame. Joshua, Judges.
Mm-hmm.
So that really didn't have anything to do with it.
Probably not, but I wanted to say it anyway.
The way that Stephen worded some of his testimony, if you will, in Acts chapter 7, some scholars concluded that he was quoting from or referencing the Samaritan Pentateuch. I don't really think that's the case, but there's certainly there's an argument to be made that he was quoting from that instead of, well, some would say he's quoting from the, a different version of the Tanakh, more like at Qumran, or possibly from the Greek Septuagint text.
I would think he would be getting something from the Greek Septuagint text, because if the Masoretic text I don't think the Masoretic text had been started at that time.
Well, only if you think that Masoretic text is only the post-temple period revisions of it, but you can certainly see that the Septuagint differs from the Dead Sea Scrolls text, which differs from the Masoretic text. So if the Septuagint was copied from a Hebrew text, it was not quite the same as the Masoretic text, and not quite the same as Qumran, because it sometimes agrees with either of them,
Right.
and disagrees with the other one when there are differences.
I like to think that it was translated from the original Hebrew text.
At the very least, Are you saying there's different streams? It seems like of these translations.
Different textual traditions,
Yeah.
I would say, that were in circulation at the time, in the first century. There were different variant readings of the prophets, for example. Pretty close, but there's some very differing readings, as well as from, from the Torah itself. I mean, we've seen some differences, for example, was it 70 or 75 that came with Jacob to Egypt. So I'd like to spend the rest of our time kind of talking about Devarim 13. And we're going to reread Devarim 13, verses 1 through 5.
I wish I had my NKJVs. So much easier to understand. It's okay.
That's fine. I already know it. So you're gonna-
Everything I'm commanding you, you are to take care to do. Do not add to it or subtract from it. If a prophet or someone who gets messages while dreaming arises among you and gives you a sign or wonder, and the sign or wonder comes about as he predicted when he said, let's follow other gods which you have not known, and let us serve them. You're not to listen to what that prophet or dreamer says. For Adonai your God is testing you in order to find out whether you really do love Adonai your God with all your heart and your being. You are to follow Adonai your God, fear him, obey his vote, listen to what he says, serve him, and cling to him. So with that in mind,
Did you read 5?
I did. Oh, you have the non-Jewish translation.
Okay. I read it, so I'm good.
Okay. So, what is the applicability of this passage to believers or Israel for past, present, and future? Did Yeshua and Paul deserve to be stoned based on this passage?
No.
Because in verse 6,
You said 1 through 5. Now you're bringing 6 in.
I am bringing 6 in. And that prophet or dreamer is to be put to death because he urged rebellion against Adonai your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt and redeemed you from a life of slavery in order to seduce you away from the path Adonai your God ordered you to follow. This is how you are to rid your community of this wickedness.
I still say no.
So it's extremely important, I think, for us ministering to those who believe in Jesus, but do not keep the commandments because they believe that Jesus or Yeshua or Paul abolished or nullified them or taught against them. So future signs, or in the future, signs and wonders leading to following blank. So here's the slate here with the highlight at the top of the page there. Did Yeshua and Paul deserve to be stoned? So, prophet or dreamer of dreams, perform signs and wonders, and so on. So, first of all, yes, in terms of prophet, dreamer of dreams, Yeshua was a prophet or dreamer of dreams in the sense of, yes, right? He he performed signs and wonders. So now you have to answer this question, whether it was he was talking about another God whom you have not known previously.
Nope.
And so if you look at a very famous Christian commentator, probably well-known commentator on the King James Bible, one named Matthew Henry.
Oh.
So Matthew Henry wrote this, talking in his commentary on Mark chapter 7. One great design of Christ's coming was to set aside the ceremonial law which God made and to put an end to it. Well, first of all, the Torah doesn't talk about ceremonial law in the sense, right? It has 3 types of mitzvot, right?
Mm-hmm.
It has the kind of mitzvot that are obvious,
Mm-hmm.
the kind of mitzvot that you do because he said so,
Yep.
and the kind of mitzvot you do because as witnesses, in other words, witnesses what he did to do. For example,
Right.
the festivals.
Yep.
And so how would Matthew Henry then would understand ceremonial law, do you think?
Maybe.
Which of the three types of mitzvot would he say that Messiah came to abolish?
The second one.
I'd say more second and third, right?
Yeah, but I wasn't sure on the third because
The festivals?
the feasts and festivals.
Do Christians typically keep Sukkot?
Okay, you're right. Second and third. I agree.
So the ones that Yah said to do because he said so,
Right.
without a reason given, and the ones that are related to the edot, the witnesses, which involves
So,
keeping the festivals, right? So if Matthew Henry is right in terms of his evaluation here, if Matthew Henry is correct, this Elohim, this God of Christian tradition, has a rebellious son. Because remember, he said he came to do it. As part of his mission was to abolish the festivals and the ceremonial law. So if the God of Christian tradition had a rebellious son who abolishes his father's instructions, despite saying it came to do your will, not my own, would this son also be guilty of false witnessing when he said he came to do his father's will? Is that what we read in our reading today? As well as guilty of violating instruction to honor his father. How could this rebellious son be called sinless? So, miracle worker, prophet, leads Israel into rebellion against God who gave the commandments. These commandments are God's commandment, and this prophet or dreamer of dreams is saying, don't do them.
guilty.
Guilty, right? Sounds guilty. What about Shaul or Paul? Here's what another famous commentator, Martin Luther, said about Paul, or regarding Paul. Said, the Apostle Paul knew what the false apostles were teaching in Galatians, his commentary on Galatians chapter 4. The observance of days and months and times and years. The Jews had been obliged to keep holy the Sabbath, the new moons, the feast of Passover, the feast of tabernacles, and other feasts. The false apostles constrained the Galatians to observe those Jewish feasts on the threat of damnation. Paul hastens to tell the Galatians they were exchanging their Christian liberty for the weak and beggarly elements of the world. That's Martin Luther's commentary on Galatians chapter 4. So, again, did Paul deserve to be stoned? Well, according to Martin Luther, this apostle of Christian tradition has called Yah's feast days the beggarly elements of the world. So, prophet, miracle worker, taught that Yah's appointed times were beggarly elements of the world, and in guarding them, you exchange your liberty for slavery or bondage. So if Martin Luther is correct, Paul deserved to be stoned.
So, you would, watch this. They don't realize they're taking the word of two non-Jewish men who have no understanding of the Torah, no understanding of the Feast of Festivals, no understanding of the Hebrew, and saying God did away with it.
So I'm just saying, if Christian tradition is correct, they're giving the best evidence that Yeshua wasn't the Messiah because he was a rebellious son, and that Paul taught against Paul taught against the God who gave the mitzvot. So they're teaching against Yeshua being the Messiah because of what they're teaching.
Yeah. So why would they follow him?
Well, my view, and I think it's yours as well, you mentioned it before you even got started here, Earl, that neither Yeshua nor Paul deserved to be stoned because it didn't violate Devarim 13. Yeshua came to do the will of his Father. Can we take him at his word? He's not in rebellion.
Yeah.
He performed his mission perfectly. In other words, he did not come to do away with the mitzvot, the commandments that his Father gave, his issued. He was a truly unspotted lamb. He was a prophet like Moshe and never uttered a word against the mitzvot. If sin is defined as violation of the Torah, 1 John chapter 3, verse 4, Yeshua never sinned, so he never violated the Torah. He couldn't have violated the Torah if he was to be the perfect lamb, right? So in the book of Acts, Luke praised the people of Berea, right? He said to be a Berean, to search the scriptures, i.e. the Tanakh. They didn't have the Gospel of Luke at the time to look it up, right? Because Luke hadn't written it yet. He to find out if Paul said to search the scriptures to find out if what he was saying lined up with the Torah. And so if that's and this is Acts chapter 17. So question is, if Paul is saying, read my words, listen to my text and tell me if it does or does not align with the Torah. He was subjecting his doctrine to be ruled true or false based on, does it line up with the Torah, with the Tanakh as a whole. So he writes that the scriptures, which Tanakh, are the inspired word, profitable for doctrine, correction, and for training in righteousness. If that had been abolished, if that was as part of the mission to do that, then Paul could not have written 2 Timothy 3:16, which says to search the scriptures that the scriptures themselves rather are inspired for training, for doctrine and correction. So neither Yeshua nor Paul deserved to be stoned. Yes, they were prophets, they were miracle workers, and they teach what the Elohim of the Bible taught. So drop your stones. So kind of a follow-up question. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, the Elohim of the Bible, gave instructions to rest on Shabbat. Did your Elohim give you those instructions? Or do you have a different God? Yeshua, the Messiah of the Bible, said the greatest commandments were to love Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh and to love your neighbor. And the Torah and prophets hang or depend on these. Does your Messiah still believe this, or has he let the Torah and prophets fall to the ground? They're no longer hanging on the Torah and the prophets. Shaul, a shliach, a sent one, an apostle, directed his readers to fulfill the Torah by loving their neighbor. Okay, so if you have to personally fulfill the Torah, according to what Paul's saying, are you free to no longer love your neighbor because you no longer believe the Torah is true? Or do you still personally need to fulfill it by doing it, i.e. by loving your neighbor in specific? The Elohim of the Bible has his feast. He calls my feast in Devarim, or Leviticus 5:23. Does your God have these same feasts? Or has he maybe substituted a few other ones like, Easter, Christmas?
What are those?
They're other feasts of different God.
They're not the feast you follow.
The God of the Bible made a distinction between clean and unclean, so that wicked priests failed to teach this difference in Ezekiel 22. Does your Elohim still make this distinction or not? Well, I think that Devarim is so important because we're warned about lawlessness coming. And that's where we see this permeates the idea of that the Torah no longer applies, has been purposely abolished, is really, as it says here in Thessalonians 2, the coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan with all power, signs, and lying wonders. So back to Devarim 13, those lying wonders don't prove anything. It's, as it says, the working of Hasatan, the working of Satan. So the lying wonders are the works of the adversary, as we talked about in our what's the term? I'm thinking fun challenge. Thank you. The signs and wonders are not necessarily true because the lying wonders we see can come from the work of Hasatan. So Devarim 28, of course, is in parallel with our portion today, where it says, don't turn aside from any of the words I am commanding you today, right or left, to go after other mighty ones to serve them. So that the overarching part of that is that you shall not turn away, don't go to the left or the right, follow the straight paths, do not add to nor subtract from the word. So turning aside from any of the words is in parallel with going after other Elohim and leads to curses upon curses. All right, so what are your questions on this Torah portion? Let's pray. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King, I would thank you for allowing us to read your word today, to study your word, and we thank you for the blessing of your word. We thank you in Yeshua's name. Amen.
Amen. That was good.
Very well.
Yeah.